Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here. Today I have something of a collection update, and I'm going to go a little more in depth on the first few titles and then a little broader on some of the others. But I'll start with one of the most exciting releases in this stack, and that is Seeing Red, which is three French revenge thrillers, vigilante thrillers actually, from Fun City Editions. Now this recalls another box set they put out last year, which I was very fond of, and that is the Fatal Femmes box set. Well, two movie set, if you will, with Neige and Lagarce. Very cool noir adjacent stories set in Paris, if I recall, both of them. It's been a minute, but both French and both interesting. This is going to appeal to even more people, and it is a really neat set of films that I had no familiarity with at all before they were announced. So the films in question, I'm going to go in preferred order, but I'm just going to name them off the bat. The 1982 film Shot Pattern, 1984's Street of the Damned, among many other names, and Blacklist, also from 1984. Fun City Edition site said they reflect a collective paranoia about random violence in cities, as well as the international box office success of films such as Death Wish, which depicted ordinary citizens directly confronting criminals. So that's sort of the origin of some of this. I guess there was a series of French crime police thrillers that were prevalent in the 1980s, and I think all of these, well, two of them at least, fall under that umbrella. The other is a very unique, offbeat animal, to say the least. But I'll start with my favorite of the group, and that is Blacklist. And just so you see, we have our slipcase. One side of the artwork shows the Street of the Damned and your extra stuff on the back. And then inside we have all three discs. And this set includes a new booklet essay by Barry Forshaw, who I'm definitely a fan of, and who often works in conjunction with Kim Newman, and they are one of my favorite commentary duos. But anyway, this is the booklet that's included inside. So let's talk about Blacklist. So this film is really neat, and it is something of a sort of different approach to this revenge thriller idea, because it has sort of multiple elements. Basically, the general idea of the film, and there's going to be some slight spoilers because I just sort of have to set things up, but we open with a group of criminals, thieves that are planning a robbery, and they have a layout of some really impressive artillery, like including like a rocket launcher, and we're seeing sort of their setup. Next scene, we see them meeting with a group of young punks, three of them, two boys and a girl, late teenage years, and they are setting up a bank robbery with them and telling them the bank they should rob and when and all this. And the kids are a bit skeptical to start, but decide to take on the gig, and it goes bad. It turns into basically a Dog Day Afternoon short situation where they bust into the bank, and immediately the cops show up because they've been tipped off by these other, thieves, because what the kids don't realize is that the thieves are looking for a distraction so that they can rob an armored car that is on its way to that bank, or I think it's on the way to that bank, and get all the money out of that. And so all the cops are occupied with this bank holdup, hostage situation, which it becomes, and the criminals get away with the armored car robbery. But the kids eventually sort of get out of that situation. I'm not going to get into specifics of how, and they are not happy that they've been played, and they immediately go to the bigger thieves, and there is a conflict. One of the younger teenage punks is killed, and the girl and the other one are left to retreat. In the meantime, during the Dog Day Afternoon scenario, the mother of the teenage girl has been called in to try and negotiate with the daughter, and we find out they're estranged, and that the mother is like an ex-race car driver who now runs her own shop where she repairs cars and stuff. And she ends up, the daughter ends up back with her mother. Something has happened to her. It causes the mother to go into vengeance mode. And she and the other teenage boy basically are now seeking out the rest of these thieves. And she wants the mother, that is, to kill them. And she does pull that off in some ways. And I won't go into specifics about how she does it, but there's some really interesting ways that some of these guys are dispatched. But that said, all the while, there's, of course, a group of police that are trying to find these criminals as well. Both the teenage punks that are on the run still and the thieves that did the armored car robbery. And that particular detective that's heading up, the lieutenant that's heading up that group, may or may not care if they end up in court or dead, because he knows that they might get off on a technicality or what have you and not end up spending any time in jail. So anyway, it is a really neat thriller, and I love the approach of having this mother be sort of the badass that is going after these dudes. And there's a lot of cool stuff here. There's a lot of interesting locations and car chases, and it's just a really solid thriller, and I was really taken with it. Like, it really got me. Something maybe about being a parent, I don't know. But great stuff. There is a commentary by Walter Chow here from Film Freak Central. And one of my favorite critics, he's a guy that I like very much. He's a big Walter Hill guy. He wrote a book on Walter Hill. He speaks of how the film reminds him of many things, including The French Connection, Thief, The Driver, The Conformist, which he mentions that the director was apparently an AD on, I think. He mentions Quadrophenia, The Damned, Girl on a Motorcycle, and how the editor of the film was his way in, and she had cut Melville's Army of Shadows, and her mom had actually cut Melville's Bob Le Flambeur and Le Samurai. So she's sort of French filmmaking royalty in that sense. She also cut, the daughter also cut Four Flies on Grey Velvet and other stuff. And she's the brother of the director, and he is the daughter, or the son of the woman who edited those Melville films. So anyway, it's an interesting combo of folks, but really solid stuff, and I very much enjoyed Blacklist. Following that, we have Shot Pattern from 1982, which is a little more straightforward, but still not exactly the same as a Death Wish type movie, where we have a gentleman who, he and his girlfriend, we see them sort of hanging out at the beginning of the movie. At the end of the night, they're doing some fun, couple hangout stuff, but we do get a sense of them, and we do start to become invested in them. At the end of the night, she's getting on the train to go meet her parents. He begs her to stay the night with him. She says she can't. That will be their fateful last meeting, as she is attacked and killed on the train by a bunch of punks, 3 punks, older gentlemen. Well, I mean, they're not teenage, but they're, adults. And so then it becomes a case of, like, the boyfriend becomes sort of the Charles Bronson-y type scenario, pursuing his own investigation while the cops are pursuing theirs. And it's an interesting one, because I I feel like maybe I've seen a concurrent investigation like this, but not a lot. So he's pursuing a gun angle. There's like a gun that was flashed by one of the punks, and he's sort of working that angle, and the cops are working another angle, which is like how he killed her with a specific judo chop, and that like they can go and find the dojos maybe where this was taught, and maybe one of those senseis will recognize him, etc., etc. It's a really interesting Death Wish type, but that's not even a fair scenario because it builds to like an incredible climax. It's a very neat movie in the way that it progresses, and I definitely enjoyed it. It has Dominique Pignon from Delicatessen as one of the thugs. The main character has a big blown-up picture of Burt Lancaster in some Western on his wall. I think it's either The Professionals or Veracruz. I thought that was an interesting detail. And it is just a neat, vigilante thriller. It has a commentary, one of two, by Travis Woods, friend of the show, friend of mine. Great film writer, great aficionado of film noir and erotic thrillers and many other films. And he goes into detail about the film and how it was the first film of this director, 30-day shoot over 83 locations, part of that series of French police thrillers that were popular in the 80s. I think they were called Polar. But it's a great commentary, and Travis has a very soothing voice on top of that. So it's really neat to have him involved in this set. And he goes deep on the next film as well, which is Street of the Damned, which is definitely an odd duck of a movie. It is a tricky one to encapsulate in some sense, but it is basically the idea is that you have, it's like a desolate Paris suburb, and it's sort of run, it almost feels post-apocalyptic. It's sort of run by a crime boss called Hagen, who rules his turf with an iron fist. And one of his former friends, this character Chet, not accidentally, he does something at the beginning of the film that triggers conflict between he and the boss, and it ends up becoming a kind of a battle between the gang that the boss runs and this guy, and a lot of people don't make it, and it's tough, but it's really interesting because it's based on a David Goodis book. And David Goodis, great crime fiction writer from the sort of golden period of Jim Thompson, Raymond Chandler, James M. Cain, and his work would be adapted into many film noir type movies like Dark Passage and Nightfall, The Burglar, and of course Shoot the Piano Player. And there's an odd, offbeat nature to his stories. While there are some, steadfast genre elements, there's just some odd stuff about this one. The character at the center is definitely an anti-hero. He may not be likable at all to some. I do find that an interesting element. But yeah, it's not even one I will try to summarize beyond what I've already done. But it's based on the David Goodis novel, Epaves, a.k.a. Street of the Lost from 1952. And that is something that Travis Woods touches on in his commentary. He calls the film a deeply odd and hypnotic film of extremes, and he mentions that it feels like a subdued Walter Hill film. I think he's referring to things like Streets of Fire and The Warriors, but like he said, subdued, way turned down, in terms of the style and the world, the super heightened world that those films take place in. But he mentions, again, Jim Thompson, Raymond Chandler, James M. Cain, and Goodis as sort of his Mount Rushmore of hard-boiled noir writers. And he gives a brief history of Goodis, and goes in deep on this film and has a great admiration for both this film and shot pattern, and I appreciate that, certainly. Also included on this disc is an archival interview with the director, who says he was inspired to shoot Streets of the Damned by Jean-Jacques Benet's Mood in the Gutter, which introduced him to the world of David Goodis, got him reading Goodis, and he talks about the sort of fable-like quality to the film and how it has elements of a Western story as well. There's also an archival interview with actor Bernard Pierre Donadieu, who plays sort of the villain, the heavy, about 16 and a half minutes. And he talks about being cast, or rather initially not being cast and then being called in to replace the original actor that had been chosen. Goes on to recall his recollections of the production and some choices he made internally about the character, which I found fascinating. There's also on the shot pattern disc some brief archival interviews with the director Jean-Claude Messiaen, about like 4 or 5 minutes, and another one with the main actor as well. So you get some archival interviews with actors and directors, along with some nice commentary tracks. Just a good, solid set from Fun City Editions. A label that I've championed a lot. Obviously, I have some bias as I'm friends with the guy who runs the thing, but I really did enjoy this set, and I, again, wasn't aware of any of these films. So this is a high recommend for fans of vigilante thrillers and Walter Hill movies, what have you. Definitely worth your time. That's Seeing Red. Okay, so moving into more horror genre stuff, we have DEATHDREAM, aka Dead of Night. This is from 1974, and this is, of course, Bob Clark, a great director of varied styles, for sure, in that he, is most known probably for his film Christmas Story, but of course, in horror circles is equally well known for Black Christmas, which he would do after this. He would start with a film called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, which actually got a 4K last year. That is something of a ripoff of Night of the Living Dead in some ways. And that film would, and its success, would lead to Dead of Night getting produced. And Dead of Night is a really neat, and I think finally starting to hit its stride in terms of recognition, early 70s horror film that deals with the zombie mythology, but kind of puts its own spin on it, in that you have some grief-stricken suburban parents played by John Marley, fresh off The Godfather, and of course he had worked with Cassavetes and Faces and some other of his works, and Lynn Carlin, who is another actor who you wouldn't know. She did a lot of interesting stuff, including Faces. She's also worked with Cassavetes, so she and John Marley worked together there. But she also did like Taking Off with Milos Forman, Battle Beyond the Stars, etc., etc. So she's an interesting genre actor too. But so their son, they find out is killed in Vietnam. They get a telegram he's been killed, and soon after that, oddly, he returns home. He's played by Richard Backus in a really interesting performance. So he comes home and he is acting a little strange. And we find out that, and I'm not going to go into specific details, but basically he is dead. But he is somehow able to maintain his life force by injecting himself with blood. Now, I find this really interesting because, as I said, Children, Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, inspired in part, at least, or primarily by Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero. Now we have a character, something of a zombie, almost vampire, that injects blood. And then, of course, George Romero would go on to make Martin, which is a movie about a vampire-type character that also steals blood and injects blood. So I find that, you know, these two films could easily be in conversation. But yeah, it's a really unique portrait and a slow burn in terms of what is going on with Andy, you know, and it builds to a really remarkable and moving climax. There's an incredible drive-in theater scene. There's just an ending that's really an all-timer, and it's a really solid movie on a budget from a great director finding his footing in the world of horror. And I do think the more I've seen it, the more I appreciate it, and the more I appreciate the performances and the not hitting you over the head message and sort of the allegory of what Vietnam did to a lot of those soldiers, you know, in terms of the impact, long-standing, you know, and it's just an interesting political but low-key political kind of film written by Alan Ormsby. And it's just a really neat one. So this one has come out on Blu-ray before. This is a new 4K scan of it. It's Ultra HD with Dolby Vision HDR, and it looks great. A 4K 16-bit from the 35 negative. It looks really good. You know, it's a low-budget film, of course. The mix is the mono mix, but they've done a nice job of making that sound as good as it can. It sounds like a mono mix. It's not Dolby Atmos, but it is a good sounding mix. It doesn't take away from the film. It only helps enhance it. And so this one, I just really dig. And it's got a ton of extras. It has 3 audio commentary tracks. We have, I'll name out the new stuff. One of the new features here that hasn't been featured previously is an audio commentary. So you have an audio commentary with co-producer director Bob Clark. I think that's moderated by David Gregory, and an audio commentary with writer, makeup artist, uncredited, Alan Ormsby. I think that's also Gregory when he was with Blue Underground. So those go back to probably the DVD days, I think. But both are fascinating. Bob Clark, a very intelligent, soft-spoken man, and really just sharp. Just listening to his memories of the film and how some things are more simplistic than we might think, you know, in some ways. And I don't know how to describe that other than to say he just really reduces things to their essence. Alan Ormsby, a fascinating makeup artist and writer, and a guy who I think doesn't get enough credit for being one of the early gentlemen to work with Tom Savini. This is Tom Savini's first, as far as I know, his first gig as a makeup artist assistant. And there's some great makeup effects in this, as Andy's character has some degradation. There's some straight up zombie stuff, but there's also some degradation of his face as he doesn't have blood. It's really interesting in terms of the makeup. But anyway, so those are the 2 of the commentaries. Then we have a new commentary track that's new for this edition with film historian Troy Horwath and Nathaniel Thompson, who I find to be a very venerable duo and always do a nice job with their research, and always enjoy their tracks. Now, those commentaries are all included on the 4K. This, of course, is there's the alternate artwork, Blu-ray and a 4K set. Now, in addition to that, there is one new featurette, which I'll get to in a second. But I'm going to go through these featurettes. Now, these have been featured on the previous Blu-rays, which from Blue Underground, by the way, have always been great in terms of the transfers and the extras. Blue Underground is among my favorite labels in terms of what they do. So we have, first off, a recollection with star Anya Liffey and writer makeup artist Alan Ormsby. That's about 30 minutes. Sit-down interview with both of them. They talk about their beginnings creatively. She started in one of his short films, which we see clips of, and which, by the way, is actually an extra feature on this film, that entire short film, which is never named, I don't think. Ormsby talks about he and Bob Clark seeing Night of the Living Dead and deciding to rip it off with Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. Then he talks about how the success of that film led some Canadian producers liking it to them wanting to produce this. and how they basically asked, do you have anything else? And Ormsby can't recall, nor can Bob Clark, if the script was written prior to this request or if he just threw it together in about he put it together pretty quickly. That said, and it's a script that I enjoy, 3 weeks or something. But a nice commentary between these two, conversation that is. We have Notes for a Homecoming, an interview with composer Carl Zitterer. That's about almost 20 minutes. And I should mention his score is really helpful in terms of the atmosphere for the film. It's piano based and it is dark, and there are some deep, notes that he leans on. But there's also some sadness there. It's just a really helpful and atmospheric score. He tells the story of his history as a musician, finding his way into a drama department where he met Bob Clark. And he tells the story of showing children who shouldn't play with dead things on 35, which he said that when he works on films, he requests a 35 print because he finds that in terms of a resume builder, that just playing the music doesn't work, and that you need to show the film with the music to someone if you want to exemplify your work. So he's showing the film to some Canadian distributor guy or production company guy who ends up being one of 4 dudes that are part of Quadrant Films, which ended up producing Death Dream, and that he was the one kind of that put this guy onto, because he was in Canada before Bob Clark. I mean, Bob Clark, I think, is from Canada, but he wasn't working. Anyway, so it sounds like Zitterer is the guy that triggers this production company, their interest in getting Death Dream, or working with Bob Clark, and then it turning out to be Death Dream. I find that fascinating. But he's a very interesting dude. Neat interview with him. Flying down to Brooksville, an interview with production manager John Bud Cardos, which is only about 5 minutes. And he would go on to direct things like Kingdom of the Spiders, The Dark, and others. He talks about using his plane to pick up and drop off actors as well as the film as they were shooting, during in Florida, and they were a ways from the labs, and he could get to the, lab area or the airport in like 10 minutes. And so it was very helpful. Fun dude, definitely a character. Something called Tom Savini, The Early Years, which is about 10 minutes, an interview with Savini talking about his inspirations to becoming a makeup guy, seeing Man of a Thousand Faces and, doing, being Dracula in a magic show. That's a great story. Then, of course, he would go on to be a war photographer in Vietnam, where he witnessed some pretty horrible atrocities, but they definitely informed his creations as a makeup artist. And he says that the makeups that he would make, one of the baselines was that if it didn't trigger the same feelings that those photographs from Vietnam did, then it wasn't right. And that definitely, is the kind of work that we're used to seeing from him, and that has impacted a lot of us and a lot of filmmakers. But he goes into specifics about Death Dream and working with Alan Ormsby, being a little intimidated at first, and just a great working experience. A good interview with Savini. Death Dreaming, an interview with the star Richard Backus, about 12 minutes, talking about his way into the film. And then this new piece is called The First Andy, an interview with actor Gary Swanson, which is also about 12 minutes. And Swanson talks about being originally cast as Andy, and we see some of his original screen tests. And actually, another feature is the extended full version of those screen tests. But he actually was put in the movie in the opening Vietnam section, so he's in there, but he's not Andy. I think it was decided he didn't have enough experience. But it's neat to see him talk about his memories of the audition process as he's just rewatched or seen for the first time his screen tests, and it's like 40-something years later. So it's neat to see him reacting to it. So we have, again, the full version of those screen tests, about 12 minutes, and then the Alan Ormsby full version of the student film that features Anya Liffey, who plays the sister in this. But yeah, great release from Blue Underground. Very psyched that they put this out on 4K. Really nice stuff. So highly recommend Death Dream. Just a few more things here. We have from the MVD Rewind collection, changing gears a little here. We have Hardware Wars. It's funny that I would have a comic pratfall to open this little interstitial review of this movie. This is, of course, one of the first, I think the first parody of Star Wars, and a pretty goofy film at that. It is the story of Fluke Starbucker and Augie Bendoggy, Ham Salad, Artie Deco, and it's just a goofy, about, depending on the cut you're watching, about 10 to 13 minute, kind of an extended trailer, but it is goofy and is parodying scenes from Star Wars with home appliances like toasters and irons and waffle irons, and it's just goofy, but it's like super fun. It's made by a guy named Ernie Faselius, and this disc includes multiple versions of Hardware Wars. It includes let's see here. Well, it's a brand new 2K HD transfer from the only known surviving element, a 16mm reversal print. And there's actually a little warning at the top that says that because of poor handling of the camera original, there's a lot of dirt, especially there's some process shots where, you know, an iron or as a spaceship is like shooting at something else, and it's super fun, like stop motion-y kind of stuff in some ways. But they said basically they left that dirt in because it is the way that the original audiences would have experienced it at the time. So it's 1:33:1, but there's also a foreign version that's slightly shorter. There's a director's cut that's shorter than that. These are SD versions. There's a prequel featurette that's about 5.5 minutes. There's a commentary from Ernie Faselius, who is a goofball, definitely a goofy guy, and does not take the commentary particularly seriously. There's even just sort of a joke at the beginning, like, where is he? He hasn't even shown up yet, blah, blah. At some point, he sort of goes regular commentary, but it's never really insightful. It's just kind of a goof of a commentary, which, you know, seems fitting. There's also a 1978 Creature Features interview with Faselius, which feels like the intro to a cable access show where he's equally silly, like playing it very straight, says he's like got a degree in laughology, and just talking about an interesting thing where he's talking about all this merchandise, that's the way the reason the movie was made. And it's very reminiscent of the stuff in Spaceballs, you know, like Spaceballs, the toilet paper. He's got the making of book. He's got the soundtrack, which is just space, which is nothing. There's no sound. Just all kinds of goofy stuff. So that's in keeping. But what's also here is Hardware Wars Saves Christmas featurette, a couple other films from Ernie Faselius, including Pork Lips Now, which is presented in SD, but it's about 21.5 minutes. It's a take on Apocalypse Now, and it's very much like Hardware Wars, going right at spoofing the voiceover from Martin Sheen and all these things, but it's set in like a suburban area, and he's trying to go to Chinatown. It's goofy, but enjoyable. There's also Plan 9.1 from Outer Space, which is also about 20 minutes long, and that's a parody of Plan 9 with puppets, and that's pretty funny, I have to say. So inside we get a collectible mini poster and some an eBay address for Hardware Wars merchandise. But yeah, you have your mini poster, which is basically the cover of the Blu-ray. But a nice release for fans of this movie. I thought it still held up as being as goofy as it was. Just a thing I realized I've watched a lot because I remembered a lot of the dialogue. But yeah, neat to see this get a nice Blu-ray release. That's Hardware Wars. And then we have a set from the good folks at Radiance Films. This is Shinobi. And Shinobi is a it's a set of 3 films. The website says it's the 16th century and Japan is in chaos. Samurai clans engage each other in battle over who gets to rule the nation, while warlords call upon the ninja to spy on and assassinate their rivals. Goman, an ambitious young member of a ninja family, is thrown into the turmoil of Japanese history when his village is wiped out by the forces of leading warlord Oda Nobunaga, who was sworn to eradicate the ninja in his quest for absolute power. Fueled by vengeance, Goman uses every weapon in his arsenal to bring down Oda and to prove that that a ninja is an army of one. Starring the Japanese James Dean, Raizo Ichikawa from Sleepy Eyes of Death and Conflagration, alongside Tomisaburo Wakayama from Lone Wolf and Cub, and the Bounty Hunter trilogy, which came out recently from Radiance, and Ayako Wakawa from Elegant Beast and Red Angel. The Shinobi series was an epic making success and became a social phenomenon that left deep marks on Japan from the 1960s, from children's playgrounds to leftist counterculture, packed with spectacular and oft-copied action scenes. It also established the ground rules for ninja movies that followed, introducing such classic tropes as the shuriken throwing star and the iconic black mask and suit. So, this one is a really neat set. I love the emphasis on Asian cinema, not just martial arts, but Asian cinema in general, that Fran over at Radiance has done with his label. So as you can see, this comes in a nice box, and we have the first film, which is Band of Assassins, followed by Revenge, and the third film being Resurrection. So we have 2 different 2 films on one disc. To start, we have a nice booklet. Actually, it's a really nice booklet, actually. And this one is, it's got 6 postcards of promotional material from the films, reversible sleeves. The booklet features new writing from Jonathan Clemens on Shinobi, Nomo series, and Diane Wei Lewis on writer Tomoyashi Murayama. It is region A and B. And in terms of these movies, just breaking them down, Ninja Band of Assassins from 1962. In terms of a brief plot of just that one, Warlord Oda Nobunaga seeks to unite a fractured Japan. A young man trained in the arts of ninjutsu is manipulated by a ninja master into attempting to assassinate the warlord before he completes his task. That's the first movie. The second movie, Shinobi no Mono 2, Vengeance. As the film opens, the warlord Nobunaga Oda rides to Ayokoni Shrine. He is asked if he thinks he has destroyed all the ninja who opposed him, and he answers that he suspects that there may be more. And a servant brings water and tests it first, and the page dies, and we hear gunshots, and 2 ninjas flee the scene. His suspicions are confirmed. Nobunaga oversees the execution of captured ninja and decides that in the future he needs a much more cruel method of execution. The Daimyo Hideyoshi comes to visit. That's a basic plot of the second movie. Third movie, we last saw Ninja Oshigawa Goman, that's Raizo Ichikawa, as he was about to be boiled alive. But a good ninja is both hard to find and even harder to kill. With the help of the enigmatic Hattori Hanzo, Goman lives to skulk another day and sets his sights on bringing down the warlord who tried to turn him into soup, Tomoyato Hideyoshi. And as always, in the background, the subtle hand of Togawa Ieyasu is pulling strings as he plots to rule all of Japan. So these really do seem to go together as almost like one big movie in terms of the trilogy of it. But But yeah, this, again, just movies I've never heard of. That's the thing about Radiance for me, is he's always pulling out stuff that's completely off my radar. Now, I'm an admitted, in terms of Asian cinema, it's not my strongest. I've certainly seen my share of it. But that said, there's a lot that I haven't seen, and that's exemplified by just about everything that Fran puts out. So this Shinobi set is very interesting looking to me. And then we have another one from the good folks at Blue Underground. This is a controversial film, to say the least. It's Goodbye Uncle Tom from 1971. Now, this is a really epic set, I should say off the bat. As you can see, it's like thicker than your normal set, and it's the 4K Ultra HD, but it also includes obviously a book, but you have Blu-ray, you have 4K, actually you have multiple Blu-ray, 4K, and soundtrack included. And so it's one of those epic soundtrack included releases, which I love that Blue Underground does from time to time. So this is a film I was unfamiliar with. It's apparently considered too shocking for the world in some ways. Written, produced, and directed by Gualtiero Jacopetti and Franco Prosperi of the Mondo Cane films. It's an epic recreation of the American slave trade atrocities, and it was condemned as depraved exploitation and acclaimed as unprecedented cry of black anguish and rage. Legendary film critic Pauline Kael called it the most specific and rabid incitement of the race war. It became one of the most reviled and misunderstood films of its time. 5 decades cannot diminish Goodbye Uncle Tom's impact or its quiet controversy, as it has become even more relevant today. In 1971, the distributors were forced to completely recut the film and radically rewrite its extreme narration, removing more than 13 minutes of race war politics and inserting alternate scenes, creating what would become an entirely different film before it was released. Now, more than 50 years later, both versions of Goodbye Uncle Tom can finally be seen in brand new restorations, scanned in 4K 16-bit from the original negatives with Dolby Vision HDR, newly restored DTS HD master audio, and packed with over 5 hours of extras. So this one's got a nice audio mix, both English and Italian. The English version runs 123 minutes with optional English and Spanish subtitles. Italian version runs longer, 136 minutes. I mean, just to summarize this film, the idea is basically that 2 documentary filmmakers go back in time to the pre-Civil War American South to film the slave trade, which is just such an interesting and revolutionary idea. But obviously, doing it that way, even from a 1971 lens, is going to be tough to watch, Yeah, so that idea alone I'm fascinated by. But so there's lots of extra features here that contextualize this very controversial film. You have the importance of shocking Gualtiero Jacopetti, a feature-length documentary by director Andre Bettinetti that's 94 minutes. So you've one of the directors in a feature-length documentary that we sort of get some background on it, and The Godfathers of Mondo, a feature-length documentary by David Gregory from Seven Films, but he was with Blue Underground. That's 89 minutes. You have 2 full-length documentaries included here. The Goodbye Cruel Mondo, interviews with writers, directors Gualtiero Jacopetti and Franco Prosperi, and composer Ritz Ortolani. Ritz Ortolani, one of my favorite Italian composers. That's 20 minutes. You have behind-the-scenes 8mm footage with audio commentary by production manager Giampaolo Lomi. That's 50 minutes. Mondo Mercenaries, an interview with author and academic Mark Goodall, 27 minutes. Abject Under Authoritarianism, interview with Professor Matthew J. Smith, 20 minutes. Extensive still galleries, including Giampaolo Lompek's behind the scenes photos. As a bonus, you have the Goodbye Uncle Tom original motion picture soundtrack CD by Richard Lonnie, and a collectible booklet with new essay by Dan Madigan as well. So a really epic 4K release of a very controversial film. Kudos to Blue Underground for going for that. Then we have another 4K. This is one from Cult Epics, and it is continuing their series of Tinto Brass releases. And this one is from his 1998 film, Frivolous Lola. And I didn't realize it was such a new film. It's a 2-disc 4K release. Join the Joie de Vivre club with the maddeningly charming Lola as she plots to loosen up her fiancé in this exuberant sexy comedy. Everyone is wild about Lola, even some suspect her own stepfather. Frivolous Lola is Tinto Brass's most likable film. Cult Epics presents the 4K UHD world premiere of the uncut and uncensored director cut with new and vintage bonus features. So very nice 4K presentation of another Tinto Brass film. And we have some cards inside and a booklet as well. I'm not as familiar with Tinto Brass's work. Like this is the second 4K that I've seen from them, and I just don't know his stuff quite that well. New 4K transfer from the original negative and restoration with HDR. New DTS HD 2.0 stereo and 5.1 surround Italian and English mixes. New audio commentary by Eugenio Ercolani and Nathaniel Thompson. Very cool. And that's all just part of the 4K. In terms of the Blu-ray, the previous stuff plus an interview with director Tinto Brass from 2004 and double-sided sleeve with original Italian poster art, 20-page illustrated booklet with liner notes by Eugenio Ercolani and Domenico Minetti. Yeah, very, very cool that Cult Epics is pursuing Tinto Brass as a filmmaker. Then we have Sabotage. Now, this is a MVD Rewind release, and this one is from a filmmaker that I am definitely familiar with, but I haven't seen this movie. This is Sabotage, and it is from director Tibor Takis, and he would most famously do the film The Gate, but he also did The Gate 2. He did I, Madman. I'm a huge fan of that, and a ton of others. But this is sort of his like action sniper. I don't know. It says Colonel Michael Bishop. That's Mark Dacascos, who was most recently in John Wick 3. Last mission went horribly wrong. Destroyed from within. Sabotaged. He was the only body dragged from the ashes of a black operation that never happened. And that's sort of the intro of the film, which is a great intro because you see Mark Dacascos and the guy who seemingly will become the heavy of the film, and that's Tony Todd, in a really great intro for him. After years of recovery, Bishop thought he escaped the black ops and began a successful new life as a bodyguard to the rich and famous. He was the best and with skills most men died learning, but his past caught up with him. His clients began to die violently at the same time, a shadowy hand that conspired against his black op unit. Now he must go on one last mission to destroy the faceless men that run an army that doesn't exist in this underrated gem from director Tibor Takis. Co-starring Carrie-Anne Moss and, of course, Tony Todd and Graham Greene from Dances with Wolves also. So an interesting, seemingly maybe lower budget action thriller from 1996 that totally slipped by me. 1080p presentation, 185:1, LPCM 2.0 stereo sound, and new interview with actor Mark Dacascos, that's about 30 minutes, a little longer, and a new interview with Tony Todd, that's about 13 and a half minutes included here, as well as a double-sided artwork and a collectible mini poster, which is often the case with these MVD Rewind releases. Anyway, that will do it for this round. Thank you so much for watching. Definitely check out that Seeing Red Fun City Editions and the DEATHDREAM 4K. Those are my big picks for this group. But a lot of stuff here. Thanks for sticking with me, and thank you for listening. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.